This video was not the plan for the Acura Wayfarer. See, the original plan was to get a prototype in late last month and then turn around and do a really quick review and have it published for the last week of its Kickstarter. Yet a funny thing happened. You see, the day that it was shipped off to me was the same day that the project was canceled and put on indefinite hold. So there really wasn't any sense of urgency. Let alone, it didn't really make sense to do a full review on a product that may never actually be produced. Yet even after it was canceled, I got to spend some time with it, as well as get some good footage, and it seems like kind of a waste just to ignore that footage. So today I thought we'd look back at what it was, what happened to it, and if there are any lessons that we can learn as consumers, especially when it comes to maybe tips with Kickstarters. Every once in a while you run across a watch design that just really clicks with you, and the Wayfarer was one that did it for me. And my interest in it goes back to the very beginning of this year, where I just happened to run across it on Instagram. So I immediately reached out to the owner, Philip, and just asked if he was planning to do a watch tour later on, and if he was, I'd love to be involved, and he said he'd get back to me. And part of my fascination with the Wayfarer is just because I have an interest in watches with an internal compass bezel, even though I've never really owned one. In fact, it's kind of becoming a minor obsession. I've talked about in the past how I really love the look of the Seiko Alpinist, but I'm just not really sure it's worth it now that it's been discontinued. And there was another watch that I really wanted to get, but never really materialized. And it was a project watch on WatchUseek, and the idea was to basically take a Vostok K34 and turn it into a Russian Alpinist. But there never really was enough interest and the project never got off the ground. But the Wayfarer really just spoke to me. It seemed to be just the right size at 40 millimeters wide and about 48 lug to lug. And I really just loved the very circular symmetric dial, especially the red variant and this one that's gray with mint green accents. Plus, I'm always a sucker for lume, and there were some great lume shots that were posted on Instagram. And after seeing it in person, I can tell you that it definitely has fantastic lume, and I think the pictures here really speak for themselves. I just really love that fully lumed stick secondhand. And one awesome touch I did notice is that the break on the minute hand lines up perfectly with the border between the inner and outer circles of the dial. It's also just a really fantastic and comfortable watch to wear. I think it's only about 10 millimeters thick, and that's all thanks to the Miyota 9015 movement inside. And the bracelet itself is also really comfy and had kind of a bit of a royal oak thing going on. In fact, the only thing that I really wasn't a fan of on the watch was the clasp on the bracelet. It's good, but I think they really should have opted for a butterfly clasp, as I think it would work better here. And the price was also just a little high, at least for the specs inside. I think it was right around $500 US, and that was for the early bird. But otherwise, I thought it was an awesome watch, and I was honestly disappointed when the Kickstarter was canceled, especially because I had actually joined the Kickstarter earlier. And after spending time with the prototype, I was even more disappointed. In fact, I even offered to buy the prototype from him, but someone else had beaten me to it. So what happened then? Well, the campaign started off really strong, and I think a lot of that has to do with Jody over at Just One More Watch, who did a really early review of it. In fact, I think they were fully funded after 13 hours, and I think fully funded is around £35,000. And after a week, I think they had £50,000 pledged, which is actually pretty good. But after that, it just sort of stalled and didn't do anything for another couple of weeks. So I think it was doing good, but maybe not as good as they were hoping for. It was fully funded, which is more than some other Kickstarters could say. But it wasn't necessarily a slam dunk like some other Kickstarters have been. But it's at that point that the owner, Philip, took a long hard look at it and decided to cancel it himself. And he did send out a letter explaining why. And I'll have a link down below to that letter if anyone's interested. But the short version is that he decided to go over and look at the numbers again, and he realized that while he had enough to cover production, he wasn't sure he had enough to cover the long-term operations of the company, including releases of new products and after-sales customer service, which I interpret to mean the warranty. And he also listed a couple of external factors that were also influencing his decision, one of which was that he was having a problem sourcing the movements, and as a result the project would be pushed out a few months. As well as just the political and economic instability in the UK right now with Brexit, which if that negatively affects the value of the pound, just simply compounds the issues he already has. Now, my take on this is that Philip is a guy who believes that if you're going to do something, then you better do it right. And as a result, that it's better to disappoint people now than run the risk of pissing them off later. Which is really a sentiment I agree with. So while it's disappointing he canceled it, if he's really not sure he can support it long term, that's a decision I agree with. I just hope that somewhere down the road he comes back to it, because I really would love to have one. I've joined a number of Kickstarters in the past, but none of them have been watches. Well, actually I've joined some watch Kickstarters in the past, but none of them really seem to get fully funded like this one. So maybe I'm just bad luck. But overall, I'd say my experiences with Kickstarters have been positive. While I've been left waiting and maybe a little disappointed by a few, I've never really been burned by one. And generally, I just like the idea of Kickstarter as an easy way for entrepreneurs to find customers, where instead of an entrepreneur seeking investors or maybe taking out a loan to fund a new idea, they instead can go directly to the customers and immediately gauge interest. And because they don't have that loan or someone else to pay off, they have a pretty low overhead, which hopefully they then pass on to the customers, especially as the customers are prepaying before production has begun and will be waiting for some time. And there are some pretty cool projects that may not have ever been able to start traditionally, but found funding through Kickstarter and have grown beyond it, including some interesting TV shows and movies that decided to go directly to their fans for funding. But like all things, you do have to be smart before you jump in on one of these. And the main thing is to never pledge money that you can't afford to lose. There's always just a little bit of risk, and there are some cautionary tales out there. But personally, I think those have more to do with the incompetence of whoever was running it rather than some sort of criminal intent. And then there are the more unusual situations, like the game Star Citizen, which is kind of a whole conversation in itself, which I'm still not sure if it's really a cautionary tale or a huge success story. All I know is that it looks damn impressive, but I gave him some money back in 2012 and I'm still waiting. Now, I do want to point out that I don't think Philip or Akura really did anything wrong here. But this whole thing has got me thinking about how other Kickstarters are picking their goals, and whether or not they're really just focusing on getting enough to produce the watch, or if they're actually planning long-term enough to support the customers after the fact. And honestly, I have no idea. But it's something that I'll be thinking about in the future as I look at other Kickstarters. And perhaps it's something that should be asked as well. Now, established companies that have done a Kickstarter before should be fine. But if it's a brand new company and this is their first watch and they have a really low price with a really low goal, then maybe it is too good to be true. After all, the thing to remember is that these really are small startup companies, and they might be run by someone who's never done this before. In which case it's possible they may not be thinking long-term enough. You know, there are always hiccups as you go down the road, and sometimes they can be drastically detrimental, and other times they just wind up being happy little accidents. So if I were to give tips on how to deal with Kickstarters, well, number one has to be never pledge money that you can't afford to lose. Well, number two is never order something you need by a certain date, as there are always delays. And number three, ideally look for companies that have a track record of doing Kickstarters before and have been able to deliver. And the fourth would be one that might change in the future, but currently you can always back out of a Kickstarter after you join it, at least up until the Kickstarter ends. So if you're really serious about something, you can join it and then ask questions directly. And if you're not happy with the answers or seriously having second thoughts, then just back out and take your money elsewhere. Anyway, that's all I have for you today. But if you do have any questions on Kickstarter or just comments about Kickstarter, feel free to leave them down below. As well as, what did you think about the Wayfarer? And as always, if you enjoyed the video, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Thanks for joining me.